What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Eastern Current. We are excited about today's episode. Got a guest on for the second time, and he's been flexible with my schedule, being kind of all over the place lately, and nice enough for him to come on. So I'm going to introduce y'all to him in just a second. Just a reminder, go check out Eastern Current Fishing on Facebook. Great place to connect with other listeners. Ask us any questions. Drop in any ideas of what y'all might want to hear on the podcast. We've done quite a few of these now, and so anything that's fresh and new, we're always excited about. So definitely go over there and check that out. Check us out on Instagram, Eastern Current Fishing, and also go check out our Patreon page. At the end of every one of these podcasts, me and the guest, whoever's on here, we'll talk a little bit longer about something real in detail, or maybe another little piece of what we had going on. And so go over there and check that out. And also, during the main guide season, I do a lot of kind of weekly updates of what I'm seeing here in our fishery and kind of how that plays over into what y'all might see where you are. So definitely go check that out. But yeah, today we're going to talk about some great big trout, some gator trout lures / baits with the one and only, I'm bringing them on right now, Christopher Bush. What's going on, man?
What's up, buddy? How are you, man?
I'm doing good.
Talking about flexible schedules. We both have pretty high demand schedules right now, man, and so I appreciate it. And it's the holidays.
It is.
And so really appreciate your flexibility. And honestly, man, the invite to come back and then just talk, man, about trout fishing. It was a good time the first time, and it's amazing to think like that was a year ago.
Yeah.
Which felt like forever.
Golly, it really does.
I know, right? But on the same token is like, honestly, how much you've grown, Eastern Current, and aside from that, like the impact that you guys have made along the East Coast with regards to conservation and kind of spreading the message, again, man, of taking care of a resource, right? That's what we're about. Yeah. And it's cool to see, like, come full circle, like a year later, that we're here talking about it, man, and it's kind of growing. So that's good, man.
I appreciate it.
Thanks again for having me on.
Yeah, man, that's such an encourage. It's cool. I'd have you on every week if I could. I don't know if our schedules would allow that, but I would, man. It's you're a wealth of knowledge, and you have in the podcast world the articulation in your explanations that I wish I had. So I get talking about something, and I'm like, I hope I explained that well. I listened to you explain something like, dang, that was right on. So get ready for that, you guys. So if y'all have not heard of Chris Bush. And the Speckled Truth, definitely go check out his Instagram page, their blog, their store, and his podcast, which you can just look up on all the podcast platforms. Are you doing anything on YouTube? I can't even remember.
No, I mean, not really.
Yeah.
We were uploading the podcast episodes.
Gotcha.
Honestly, man, the bandwidth that we do have. So it's me, Kyle Johnson, Edward Crum, Keith Morrison. I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize the other guys on the Speckled Truth that kind of help keep things going. And obviously we are, it's awesome, man, that we are growing. And so we're trying to kind of employ more family members and friends that can kind of work to some extent free and volunteer their time to help just kind of share, again, our passion and love for targeting big fish and again, taking care of them. But so, yep, anyway.
Yeah, I think what I share a lot on this podcast, man, is because I've caught some heat from people that are like, why are you sharing all this information? You're shortening the learning curve. And my argument to that, and it goes well with what you just said, is like the more successful anglers that we've got out there, the more conservation is going to mean to them. So the more conservation-minded anglers we're going to have, which is, those are the people that are going to make a difference in the long run. So that's kind of how I look at it.
That's our approach, man, frankly, is and I wrote about it on Facebook when I came back off my social media break, is, we dedicated so much time, energy, and effort. And with the intent when we started Speckled Truth, in 2013, which is crazy, but like sharing that message, the entire intent was, I love these fish.
Yeah.
And people have heard maybe, backstory of growing up, with my dad and like the love we had for Louisiana Delta and just trout only. And growing up in that environment. And so as I kind of got more into big trout fishing, that's when I really understood the energy and the effort and the evolution that I had as an angler. And then, like, I can see the tide flip in my own personal approach to taking care of the resource. That's when I was like, you know what, dude? This is a pretty special resource. We got to take care of it. And so that's when, if you can give the tools and techniques for somebody just to go out and accomplish, catch a big fish and then release it, I guarantee you, if they do that, they're going to understand the value of that resource and
100%.
how valuable that resource is alive versus dead.
Yeah.
And so if you can connect those two dots, that's where I'm at. Right?
Yeah.
And that's where we're going to be, and that's where you guys are at. And I think that's where Dave Fladd's at with release over 20. So we are kind of all in this together, right? This is a collaborative environment where we got to be at this together, because people, this is our resource. We got to take care of it. And the future of our resource is in our hands.
Yeah.
So sorry, man.
No, you're good. This is what gets me fired up. I'm like, why are we even going to talk about trout baits? Let's talk about trout conservation. But that's boring. Well, I would really love to sit down, maybe you, me, and Dave one day on a podcast and talk about that. But today, you guys, we're going to talk about Chris's favorite lures for targeting big trout. And Chris, a lot like me, is kind of a geek when it comes to the gear. Like, I get fired up about the gear because it helps us accomplish our goal. And also, gear's just, some people are just gearheads, and I'm one of those people as well. But we're going to kind of dive into his favorite lures for targeting big trout in different conditions. And I'm going to kind of turn it over to you and let you just go through a list, and I'll kind of fire some questions at you as I have them. But I think you'll be able to carry it pretty well.
Oh, okay.
So from here on out, it's just you.
No, man, that's definitely not the intent, man. It's collaborative. It's back and forth. I would. So I'm gonna go see Mike McBride and Trish Whitley down in Mansfield. I'm actually leaving tomorrow, and obviously one of my favorite places in the world. And McBride's obviously my trout fishing mentor, huge legend down on the Lower Coast, and he would tell you that really the key is finding feeding fish. Yeah. It's not the lures, because you can catch. He always says, man, you can catch them on a freaking big pen and a hook. But I agree to that. I mean, you got to understand where you're going and being there at the right time. But I am, like you had mentioned, a gearhead, where I like understanding different techniques. And I think the subtleties in different techniques, especially in fished waters, there's obviously majority of people wade fishing here. And so everybody throws a Corky Fat Boy. Everybody throws a soft plastic, right? But sometimes it's a little nuances in those techniques that vary that can really trigger a response from a big fish. Yeah. And that's something I've really found here on the Texas coast. And so I know, Corky's king. Again, if you ask me, what's your favorite big trout fishing lure, it's certainly the Corky Fat Boy, 100%. When you ask me about, different trout fishing lures, that's obviously number one, just because, one, the production of it personally, and then obviously seeing that through the citation data. But it's such a good bait, man. It emulates the profile, the presence, everything here in the Texas waters you could probably want. And you could fish it. It's like the ultimate wade fishing tool, because you can fish it fast, slow, you can fish it shallow, you can fish it deep. I mean, there's a myriad of different things you can work that. So that's why Corky's king. But, I can certainly go through an area, work it with a Corky, and then roll right back through it and throw like a shadow wrap shad or something like that with a similar, kind of bait profile. I had it up here. There it is. A similar bait profile, really deep, to some extent, like belly profile. Fish is kind of the same, parts of the water column, one sinks, one floats, and then go back and keep a bite going. Or those fish that were there, they're seeing something different for maybe the first time, and then all of a sudden, man, boom, you can go back and you can keep a bite going. You can trigger those responses, and those are the types of things I'll really look for in getting the most out of your tackle. Most people go, okay, I'm going to thread a jig head through a soft plastic. Well, man, depends on really what type of jig head profile you choose, to what type of glide pattern, or how it's fishing in the column, how fast it's sinking, all these different things. So those little subtleties are really what I try to dial in when targeting big fish, in different areas. And so, I reached out to Daniel Nussbaum from Z-Man, put me in touch with Brian Latimer, Elite Series Pro. We're going to have him on a podcast, Speckled Truth podcast. And so the idea, though, behind that is like, okay, it's a BASS Elite Series guy, right? But the correlation there is that as an inshore saltwater guy, we put less emphasis on gear and more emphasis on just like, oh, you got to go to know.
Right.
They are like super precise, right? I mean, from line diameter size to, I mean, everything from, reel ratios and all these different things. And so I want to pick his brain as an inshore, trophy trout, because he's trying to target the biggest bass bite. I'm trying to target the biggest trout bite. I'm interested to see what type of correlations the industries, or at least the approach, has across industries.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's what I'm trying to kind of pull as much out of I can, or as much as I can out of my tackle techniques as an approach.
Definitely.
So
it's funny that you talk about the bass fishing side of things, because I find myself personally diving into on YouTube when I'm kind of looking at new stuff is bass fishermen talking about different pieces of tackle, different rods, reels, because like you're saying, they are way ahead of 90% of the saltwater world as far as pushing the limit and trying out new stuff and really figuring out those tiny little nuances that can really help. So it's cool.
And dude, not only that, but like those guys are so good, right? They can punch a 1 ounce snell knot, big flipping jig, and then they can punch heavy cover, and then they can go up into like the Great Lakes and then drop shot a big smallmouth in 30 foot, just vertically jigging. And like, I personally, as an angler, I aspire to be that diverse in my approach, right? Because now I've opened up a myriad of different ways to target a fish.
Right.
It may not require it, but I have the confidence to pick up a jerkbait rod and throw a jerkbait and have as much confidence between the ears to catch those fish as I do a Corky.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's really, again, that's more maybe of an evolution of an angler perspective. But anyway, there's so much to it, dude. There's so much.
Yeah, there really is.
Actually, the freshwater side, so I'm huge on jerkbaits. So really, aside from like Corkies this time of year, I'm like a big jerkbait fiend here on the Texas coast. One, not a lot of people throw them. And so it's ideal because since a lot of people aren't necessarily throwing them from a bait profile or a bait presentation, again, with a slow ascent or a suspend style or like the ascent profile, all these different things, they're totally new to fish. And I've learned a lot of that watching like all those, different freshwater guys,
Mm-hmm.
and looking at like dudes like Japan, fishing mega bass is obviously certainly one of my favorite jerkbaits, but like Lucky Craft, again, another Japanese based, jerkbait company. And so all these different jerkbaits have different, again, ascent profiles and things of that nature. And so that's really been something I've really enjoyed learning the last like 3 years. And you can fish them in pretty shallow conditions. You can fish them in some fairly deep ones, but they're definitely applicable to the inshore saltwater guy from Texas to North Carolina and kind of everywhere in between, right? So
yeah, they definitely are.
So what do you want to cover first, man?
Well, let's just jump into just look down at your desk and grab. Let's just go through a couple of them. I don't know exactly what you have lined up, so let's go through maybe some hard baits first, because I think that might be more foreign to more anglers. Some different hard baits, and then we'll move into the soft plastics at the end. But yeah, just pick one out and let's talk about it.
All right. So how about this? To kind of keep us going, we'll do hard baits. We'll go top to bottom. So Topwater lures, admittedly, man, for the trophy trout citation data, Topwaters have a presence really across all windows. So every part of the different, every part of the year. So every quarter of the year, Topwater baits across the coast have produced big trout. Mm-hmm. I used to throw them a lot. I honestly don't throw them as much as I do anymore. But one of the things that we found was actually Head & Products. I wish I knew it off the top of my head, but it was pretty like sided to where it was like 80% of the Topwater citation catches came on a Head & Product. So this is a super spook. And it's funny because this is a super spook I grew up throwing, and it's actually the redfish pattern. Everybody knows how much I love fish. But dude, growing up wade fishing the surf in Louisiana, we used to always target some really big bites. in the surf there. And so I made the shift though because I felt like I liked a smaller profile, and so this is a Mirrorlure She Dog,
Mm-hmm.
and I like one the audible presence to it. So obviously, when you're talking about top waters, they have different things, right? They have profile, they have sound, and they have presentation. And so I prefer a smaller top water, believe it or not. So I prefer really the Mirrorlure She Dog, and the reason for that is because if a fish is going to strike, it's obviously reaction strike. And so I would start throwing a topwater bait just to see if fish are in the area. So I'll start basically working a flat, boom, I'll get a blow up or something, or I'll get a swirl. Okay, I know fish are in the area. Now I can dial it back, and now I can refine my approach. I honestly rarely stick with the topwater bait. So even if I get bit on one, I really don't like fishing topwater baits. And the reason for that is because since it is a reaction strike and the bait's on top of the actual water, there's so many variables that can go wrong with that fish hitting the bait, getting skin hooked or something along those lines, or not really teeing up the bait, and I'm not really able to get a good hook set and fight the fish. That I don't necessarily lose more than I want, but I want to increase my odds to the point where if I get bit, I'm going to land that fish.
Yeah.
If I can go out that time and get 10 bites and catch 10 fish, that's a successful trip for me. I personally don't believe top waters give that to me. What they do though is they do trigger responses from big fish, and they also tell me fish are in the area. So unless I'm really trying to cover water, that's when I'll actually go to a big topwater bait. If I'm going to throw a topwater bait though, again, it's going to be either that Mirrorlure She Dog, and then lately I've really kind of come back a little bit to, throwing a lot of the big super spooks.
Yeah.
Didn't quite realize how easy these things are to work, and I think that's probably why a lot of people like Heddon products. They're also cheap, but I actually think, to an inexperienced angler, they're really easy to walk the dog.
Yeah.
I mean, and they have a really great glide path when you're walking that dog, and so you can just really slowly, methodically do that walk the dog pattern, and they have a really, really, sharp side to side motion. As opposed to the She Dog, it's obviously a little bit more darty,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll also pause it a lot more with the She Dog because again, that sound's kind of emanating some sort of like presence, right? So I call it still hunting. Even when I pause that bait, it's still fishing, it's still hunting. And so those fish, more often than not, honestly, will actually come up and pump it when that bait's almost sitting still, right? Or right after that long pronounced pause. So
it's got a little scary sometimes when it's sitting there a little too long and whack.
Dude, so like, in heavy windy conditions, that's when I really like the She Dog. Even in some really lighter conditions, I'll kind of dial it back a little bit. I might go to like a one knocker, which has a little bit more of a subdued kind of lower pitch. And then even not like if I'm really, again, trying to cover water and really target a big bite, that's when I'll go to the super spook. But even like when in those windier conditions, just, giving a good 5 count cadence, boom, 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 and then all of a sudden like letting it sit there for a second, and those waves rocking that bait. I mean, that She Dog's click, 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 click.
Oh yeah.
So it's still working, and boom, no, you might see a wave crest, and you might not see that bait sitting there. So I love that, but
that's true.
I just think there's a lot of time where, again, those fish don't really crosshair it and get a good mouthful, if you will.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
That's when so if I get bit, even if I catch a few, I'll go ahead and make the transition, and typically it will be to the old Paul Brown Fat Boy, man. I mean, without a doubt, again, the best bait you can probably throw from a big trout fishing perspective, certainly here in the Texas coast. But I actually talked to Steve Brown this morning, and we were just talking in general about Corky sales and brokeback sales and the Super Devil and all this stuff. And he's like, man, I'm selling a lot more to East Coast anglers. And I think I think people are realizing the capabilities that Corkies do have and how much they do apply across various estuaries.
Oh yeah.
When I lived in Mississippi, I would still throw a Paul Brown Fat Boy and caught a lot of my big fish at night wade fishing in Mississippi on a Paul Brown Fat Boy. So it's just so good, and it transcends across all different estuaries. I caught them in Florida when I lived in the Florida East Coast, wade fishing over there in the Banana River, fishing up in Mosquito Lagoon over towards New Smyrna. I mean, I would fish there and throw it. Now it'd be later in the season. And it's not that there is a true, definitive Corky season. That's one of the things about a Corky fat boy that a lot of people don't realize is that the bait itself will actually change its descent speed depending on water temperature. Wow. And so I kind of did did a study. I just filled up like a little 5-gallon tank. And what I did is I wanted to see kind of really what the ascent speed or descent speed was for different Paul Brown products. And so when I came to the Paul Brown Fat Boy and the floater, I started with like room temperature water, 0 salt in the actual in the water itself, and it was like a 1.3 or 1.4 seconds per foot, which is the descent speed. As I chilled the water and added salt to it, so I chilled it down to like 55 degrees, which would simulate like wintertime water, and then I added some kosher salt, which is it's pure, and so I just stirred it in there, dissolved the salt mixture, added some density to the actual column itself, and then I started tracking the descent speeds. And what you found was really the Paul Brown Fat Boy went from like 1.3 or 1.4. I have them somewhere. I wrote an article on it somewhere. It's out there. But from that, when you start to chill it and add salt, the descent speed slows tremendously. Wow. It would go to like 2.6, 2.7 seconds per foot. So the Paul Brown floater, which I have, the Paul Brown Fat Boy floater, and I know you Caleb on, but it's a floater has the red gill.
Yeah, the red gill.
Right. The thing here is obviously it doesn't have a rattle. Paul Brown Fat Boys have rattles, or the non-floaters have rattles. What this does is when it sinks, it actually kind of glides back and sinks nose up. A Paul Brown Fat Boy, when it's descending, will actually obviously fall almost horizontally and give that wobble. Now, I was catching a lot of big fish in the springtime, early summer, believe it or not, on a floater, because, again, having that thought process in the back of my brain that when the water is colder, this was like 4 seconds per foot. It wouldn't float. It's still a super slow descent. But if you warmed up the water, it would be like 2 seconds per foot. So really, a floater in the summertime is almost like a regular Fat Boy in the wintertime. So when I would fish shallow grass or flats that had grass on it in the summertime, or when the water temps were in the upper 70s, low 80s, I would throw a floater because it's still descending pretty quick, believe it or not, unlike it does in the wintertime. And so going down to Mansfield, we just had a hard norther blow through. Probably those water levels will come down. We'll probably fish in pretty skinny water. I'm throwing a floater because I know I can cover really, really high in that water column, and I'm not going to get hung up and fish that really effectively. Yeah. So again, that's just being in tune with your tackle, your equipment, and knowing the nuances. Something as simple as really like salinity and water temperature has an impact on a bait.
Definitely.
And dude, the more you know that stuff, the more you kind of have that in the back of your brain, and you can make an educated decision on the water. So
yeah, the more that can kind of seamlessly just flow through your thought process as you're fishing, the better it is. Like, and you'll have those realization days on the water where you're like, wow, like I can't believe I just put that together, but I did, and I get kind of proud of myself and for making a decision that pans out like that. And that's cool. That's cool to see. That's impressive that you've done that study on the sink rate. I'm gonna have to look up that article and read it. I'll try to find it, maybe link it in the show, because that's pretty cool. But yeah, that's
I did the regular, Paul Brown Fat Boy. I did the Saltine XL, did the Softines and all that stuff.
Yeah, sweet.
I did the Devil as well, and you can see that is actually pretty eye opening. So the question was, Corky season, true or false? To some extent, it's kind of true because the bait does fish a little bit more effectively for wintertime fishing, but do they work all year? Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that there's just right now is the time when Corkies are super effective. And I really think it isn't necessarily as a result of the bait fishing differently. as much as I think that the actual bait availability in the resource isn't necessarily there, right? The fish are used to eating on big mullet or smaller fin fish in the spring, summer. Well, shoot, man, all that stuff's either died or growed up.
Right.
So now they're really just targeting on something with a bigger profile. So
For sure.
Fat Boy matches that perfectly.
Definitely. And when you were talking about the Topwater too, this is something that just came back in my head. That full size spook can be so intimidating as a new angler to throw, but the amount of 12-inch fish I've caught on a full size spook is insane. Probably way more than citation fish. I mean, they're not scared to eat something big like that.
Yeah, dude, those things are savages.
They
man.
are savages.
I mean, from the little 8-inch rascal, man, I'll take that super spook, no problem.
It's crazy.
They're nuts.
It is nuts. Well, let's move down to the water column then, like you were talking about. So we're talking Topwater first. Let's talk about some of the hard baits you like to fish. From the top of the water column down to maybe mid water column or a little bit deeper.
All right. Yeah, that's good. So, let's go. I'll stick with Mirrorlure because I throw a lot of Mirrorlure products. Obviously, tremendous. They've been around for forever. And honestly, Mr. Eric Botnick and Mirrorlure is just tremendous people. Admittedly, man, getting a chance to know them and start to kind of understand who they are and how they're pretty awesome. That's awesome. That's a damn company, man. But even before then, I was throwing a lot of Mirrorlures, and so the Mirrodine. It's funny because like in Florida, I threw the actual 17 MRs a lot more than I do now, and it really took one. I just threw them a lot. I would either feather the treble, even in Mississippi. I don't have the treble feathered on this one, but in Mississippi, one of my favorite baits actually, along with the Fat Boy in the winter at nighttime in the wintertime, was actually a black 17 MR with the white bones. I called it Skeletor, and it had a feathered treble, a feathered number 6 VMC treble. And what it did is it just gave a little bit more presence, a little bit more profile, and it righted the descent, and it would also slow the descent. And so I really like those. But I'll throw the 17 MR. It still finds its way in my box here in the Texas coast, mainly because if I have a lot of high pressure situations, sometimes the water can get really clear here, or if I'm fishing, again, kind of that springtime, early summer. Now I don't fish during the summer because I take off. That's when I'll typically throw like a 17 MR if the conditions are really tough. And that kind of goes into my soft plastic choice as well, which we'll talk about here in a sec. But really, I would, if I were looking at the two and I had, overcast conditions, fairly windy, big fish present in the area, and I was looking for a slow descent profile, I'm definitely going to pick the 27 MR over the 17 MR almost 10 times out of 10. Yeah. Now, if the conditions clear up, the wind shuts down, the bait kind of starts to get a little bit tougher. I'm trying to reduce the amount of presence I have in the actual column. I want the fish to know something's there, but I don't want to spook the fish by having just this really loud presence profile. That's when I go to a 17. So I do throw some others. I do throw like the Yuzuri, the inshore, twitchy minnow. It's like 2 3/4 inches, so it's like the same size as like the 17 MR, because it actually has a slower descent speed than the actual 17 MR. So I'll also have some of those as well. Again, it's just understanding what that descent speed is, kind of what you're trying to target, right? So anyway, but 27.
Any colors in those that you prefer other than over others?
More natural than anything. So my favorite is like the Bayou Green. It's actually right here. It's chewed up pretty good. But like that Bayou Green, just a natural color. I'm more of a natural color kind of person, man. As you can see, like the one Fat Boy I keep picking up, that's a Pearl Harbor. That one's been on point lately. It's just a gray back, gray belly, gold insert, and it's dominant, man.
That's
it's
awesome.
Dominant. Like the water has a little bit of stain to it, but like it's got this really nice kind of greenish color, but it's not clear. But it's like this greenish clear. It's kind of weird to explain here in the Texas coast. It gets that way, but man, it's really nice. It's different shades of gray, if you will.
Yeah.
So, but I like to stick to it pretty basic colors, to be honest with you, man. So like that one had like a chartreuse back, like that clear chartreuse back, silver side, just something like that. I'm not huge on like the Texas chickens and the really bright. Now I know they do work.
Yeah.
Halloween would probably be one that, from an off-colored, non-natural color, would probably be another choice.
Okay.
At Halloween.
Sweet.
That's pretty dominant. That's pretty good across various color spectrums. All right, so let's keep going. So that was 17 MRs, 27 MRs. The other thing I would tell you is, and I picked it up. This is actually, so this would be, that would be a 27.
Yep.
And then the 7, this is the Mirrorlure, or it's a Texas Custom Lures Double D. This is Sweet Lucy. But the idea here is these baits, unlike the 27 MR, even though they are the 27 MR bait profile and really kind of the same thing, what happens is a Double D, when you twitch it down, so a 2-3 count twitch cadence, it comes down in a column and it'll slow float back to the top. And so again, you're kind of working kind of that 6 to 8 inches below the surface, and you can really trigger a really nice response from a fish that's either uncommitted to topwater, swiping, maybe skin hooking like a fat boy or something like that. A Double D might be another really good way to get that fish down in the column, but not below them, just kind of in their face, and then sit a little bit longer, and then provide that response. And then honestly, sometimes just that really pronounced pause of that bait kind of floating back to the top, man, it really triggers them, for some ungodly reason. And so it would be that. No, so like I really classify, the 7M, Mirrorlure 7M, and the Double D is really my two kind of just below the surface baits. This one has a much quicker ascent rate than the Double D, and obviously a different bait profile. But don't forget about that part of the water column. I know I've written a couple articles on that for Louisiana Sportsman. A lot of people are like, man, I'm getting a lot of fish blow up on a topwater, and they'll immediately switch to a jig. Well, I'm like, dude, you left like a foot and a half of the water column unexplored. Those fish may not look down, and want a bait presented on the bottom. And if you're swimming a jig, it might be coming too quick through there, so you want to sit something. And so don't forget about that part of the column.
Those are sometimes the most aggressive bites too, just under the surface.
Oh my God.
They just hammer it. So
yeah, dude, I love my favorite day probably was last year. I'll never forget it, man. One, it was the quantity and the quality of the fish were insane. But it was one of those bites that was super finicky. And it was actually on a wrapless shadow wrap, just a regular shadow wrap. And it took me forever to figure it out. But once I did, it was amazing. And it wasn't a fish like every cast. It wasn't a fish like every 10 or 15 casts. It was like one every 20 casts, but every one you hooked was like, 4 or better, with a couple, really, really solid fish. And so, but what it was is they wanted that bait kind of sitting in their face. And that's when I really understood the capabilities of a jerkbait, and why, like, you hear those bass guys, like when they work in a jerkbait, they'll sit it. And I mean, sometimes they want to do anything and those fish will just eat. And that was one of those days, man. It was like a 5 to 6 or 7 count. It was painfully slow to fish it, but the anticipation of getting a bite from those big fish just kind of kept you going, right? So you make a cast, twitch, kill it, 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, 4 1,000, twitch, and so like a cast would take you 5 minutes, but it was like, oh man, any cast is. And what you would find is, like, on that long pronounced pause, it would be like twitch, 1,000, 2, boom. I mean, it was like, whoa.
Yeah, just pulling on it.
Oh man. And so I throw my jerk baits actually on a spinning rod for that reason, is because I can really loosen a drag to the point where when I'm actually ripping the bait, it's actually pulling a little bit of drag. So when they hit the bait, because sometimes they hit it so violently, they'll just keep going, boom, and then zzz, they can take as much as you want, right? I'm fishing the open flats of Texas. There's nothing really other than like some submerged shell that they're really going to cut off on or wrap me around, or so just have at it, brother. But that was really that was really the idea, man. And that was probably my most fun day last year. Just that super long pronounced pause. And if you worked it quicker or something like that, they just didn't respond to it. If you changed profile on them, they didn't like it. To the point where actually it was this color bud. This isn't the color, but the color bud, which is like a white top and it's a chartreuse bottom.
Mm-hmm.
It was that particular bait. And actually I had one fish, it wrapped. That's the only thing I don't like about shadow wraps is they had that third treble. So what happens is when that fish eats, typically the head of the bait is close to the cheek or right near the corner of the mouth, and then that bottom treble is kind of on their gill plate or something like that, and that middle treble is either flailing around. And then what happens is when those fish make those hard turns or start to run, what I found was my leader was getting caught in that middle treble. And so that's another reason I fish a light drag, is because you come back and you'd have some seriously frayed line. Well, I had one big fish on, and man, she was just ripping, and boom, just broke off. And I'm like, crap. So I tied on another shadow wrap, dude, and I sat there for like another hour and didn't get a bite.
Wow.
And it's like, damn, man. Which I'd give like $80 for a freaking shadow wrap in that color right now. So I'm never caught without a couple different colors in the spectrum. But
yeah.
Anyway, man, I'm sorry I'm super long-winded.
No, I love it, man. You know how that makes podcasts even better, man. That people are here for the information, especially me.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. You want to stay on jerkbaits?
Yeah, let's talk about jerkbaits a little bit. I know we're going to save that one you talked about for the Patreon, but let's talk about the other ones that you do like to fish.
Okay, so I've fished like a lot of different ones, man, and I've talked a lot about them. They're on our Instagram page or on.
You've done some great short videos too on Instagram. I've seen of just really deep dives on the jerkbaits.
Yep. So there's a couple different ones, and I'll just kind of run through and I'll talk briefly, as brief as I can, which is not very brief, sorry, about different ones. So there's a couple different ones in a throw. So Megabass Vision 110. We'll save the other one for later. But a Megabass Vision 110. Okay. The Rapala Shadow Wrap Shad. The Rapala Shadow Wrap. I almost grabbed the one. The I'm a Flit. This is a jerkbait that I had actually created. I'll talk a little bit more about the nuances there and why. The Lucky Craft Pointer. Megabass X80 Trick Darter. And then the Rapala BX Extreme Minnow.
Okay.
I know that's a lot, dude, but I seriously carry all those jerkbaits in my box because every single one of them has a different capability. You would, if to the outsider looking in, to the inexperienced angler, it's a lip jerkbait and it should fish like a lip jerkbait. Oh my gosh, man, there's so many different nuances, and these are just a few. I have many others, but these typically find their ways into the box. All right, so Rapala Shadow Wrap. So let's say I'm fishing waist deep water.
Okay.
Typically when I'm fishing waist deep, maybe casting into something maybe a little bit over the belly, over submerged structure. So I really like a bait that fishes down effectively the kind of the middle to lower part of the water column with the slow ascent. Now, fishing in Texas waters, super salty water, super dense water, you can have a bait that's actually, I think on the Shadow Wrap, on the Shadow Wrap box, it actually says so slow sinking. I can tell you they do not slowly sink here in Texas. They slowly float, just because the water is that dense. So if I'm going to target a jerkbait bite or kind of figure out what kind of jerkbait they're responding to, understanding the two different capabilities. So this one fishes a little bit deeper, but has a slower ascent. The Rapala Shadow Wrap Shad fishes a little bit shallower and has a quicker ascent. So if I'm targeting, fish, I'll start with the Shadow Wrap Shad, same concept, maybe fishing from top to bottom. I'll start with the Shadow Wrap Shad and I'll rip it down, knowing that I'm fishing really about the top foot of the water column with a slow float to the top. If I'm really trying to target, and let me go back to the double D real quick, which was over there somewhere. The double D, I like to fish those in kind of calmer conditions. With a jerkbait, you can throw them in some pretty turbulent conditions because you can rip that bait down and it'll stay down because the waves and the wind and all that stuff are kind of, again, with the lip, it's kind of pulling it down. Unlike with like a double D, when the wind's kind of blowing and stuff like that, you're trying to get that bait down.
Right.
With the lip, you're getting that bait down. So that's a way to effectively fish that kind of same part of the water column, but knowing that bait's getting down and then staying down with a slow float. Then I'll kind of chase them down. If nothing on a shadow wrap shad, I'll go down to a shadow wrap, which fishes like 2 foot. Again, this is in kind of the Texas area that I'm fishing, and with a much slower float. So I can sit that bait a little bit longer, and I will, just to see if that's going to drive a response. If nothing there, also too, one of the things about Rapala products that's very important to note is when they do suspend or slow float, typically they have a chin up, a scent profile, excuse me, versus like an I'm a flit, and I didn't bring it on. I'm a flit, which is a much smaller profile.
Yeah, much skinnier
profile. It has, if you can see that, the lip is super thin, and really, really like thin, but it's pretty long, but it still fishes like 1.5 feet. Little bit smaller profile. But the thing here is that it also has a slow float, but what happens is on that twitch cadence, it's much more erratic. And just because of the lip and how thin it is, it has a lot more side-to-side darting action as opposed to a shadow wrap, which is a little bit more kind of methodical, if you will. Doop, doop, doop.
So you'd consider that more of an aggressive shallow water jerkbait?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Or if those fish, I'm trying to fire them up, like they're not responding to something that's kind of more conventional, if you will. If I'm really trying to target that bite and kind of get that school fired up, or trying to, really target something in the eating, I'll throw a lot of like erratic actions, and an I'm a flit's a way to kind of do that. And you can cast it pretty well as well. Now, this is actually the Make Jerk Shad Rip Shad, kind of a same profile to an I'm a flit, but fishes, I personally believe this bait fishes little less than 1 foot and above with a slow ascent. So I'm also, again, trying to skinny down my profile and fish that top part of the column. Well, let's go a little bit deeper. So if nothing in kind of like that top 1.5 feet, 2 foot range, that's when I'll start to kind of dial it down. Oh no, this could be really bad.
I know you're going to be moving your hands at some point and grab one of those hooks.
Yeah. And one I didn't grab, which is actually a Jackal Reed range. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that one. But this is the Rapala BX Minnow, and so it's made out of balsa wood. You can maybe barely see it, but it's actually wood in there. And so what this is it actually fishes pretty deep, a little over 2 feet, 2.5 feet, but it has a quicker ascent profile because it's wood. So I can get the bait deeper, but I know it's going to come up quicker, as opposed to a Lucky Craft pointer. There it is, or actually a Megabass, that X80 trick darter, which is going to fish deeper with the slower ascent. So if I'm wanting to keep my bait down in the column, at the lowest part of the column, I'll actually throw like a Lucky Craft 90 or a 110 or something like that, get that bait down. And like on a lot of my deep water jerk baits, like on the actual lips themselves, they'll be tore up on the front end because when I'm digging, I'm hitting the bottom, but I know they're slow floating back to the top. So if those fish are kind of on the lower part of the column, maybe sitting, on the bottom itself, you can kind of see those red lesions on their belly or something like that. They're really not in a super aggressive mood. I can get that bait to them, hit that bottom, doop, 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 and then it kind of slow float it and just keep it right in front of their face. And sometimes just it's sitting right there, man, and just go nuts. Yeah. And you also have to think about too that your bait's connected to line, like your leader, and then your main line to your rod. And so like even if I'm looking one way, I still move my rod 6 inches. If the wind's blowing and if I have like wavy conditions, the wave presence on your line or on your leader is moving something. And so a bait, might be pretty static in terms of in terms of how it ascends and stuff like that. It's not just doing this. Instead, if you're moving your rod or you're looking around, looking at bait or the wind's blowing, again, just the pull on like your leader and the wave action is going to cause that bait to rock just a little bit in the column, and sometimes just that subtlety and movement will drive those fish bonkers, man. And so lastly, the ultimate deep water jerkbait that I talked about, that I love, dude, is the Mega Bass Vision 110. It fishes the deepest out of most. Probably if you're in like lesser salinity conditions, you can fish this bait really as deep as 5-6 feet, which is actually a really good segue into why I'm able to fish these baits a lot skinnier than really what the package intends for, is because what I do is, give me one sec, there it is. You can change the depths in which those baits dive by simply changing your leader. So this is 25-pound mono versus like a fluoro. I typically throw bigger diameter monofilament, mainly because I have my rod angle up in the air and I'm twitching that bait with a large diameter leader line that floats. So I'm able to keep that bait up in the column as much as possible. If I have intent of getting the bait down deeper, I can switch to either a thinner diameter fluoro. I can go to fluoro, and I can change my different rod angles, right? So all those different things, man, are subtle nuances. Like if I had a GoPro on my head and like somebody was able to like listen to me fishing, because I fish by myself pretty much all the time, that's probably why I'm crazy as I am, is because all I do is talk to myself.
That's awesome.
Trying to figure out a bite, man. Sorry.
No, you're good. I can imagine too that with those, when you're reading the packaging on a lot of these jerkbaits, because there are plenty of saltwater jerkbaits out there, but there's also a lot of the ones you're talking about are predominantly freshwater baits, bass baits. That's kind of where they're designed for. That you can already go ahead and imagine that those baits are going to float more if you're fishing them in saltwater whatsoever. The sink rate's going to be slower. So I mean, unless you're looking at the saltwater versions of some of the Rapala baits and whatnot, you can probably imagine that they're going to float a little bit better from the get go.
No, all right. So last thing. So on like the Vision 110, why is it my favorite? I totally missed that part. So when I get it down to the bottom and I'm able to tick that either shell or sand or whatever, what happens is the ascent profile, and that's why the Jackal Re-Range is another one of my favorite deep water jerk baits, is because they're almost the same and they're identical to some extent. They have different ascent profiles. And so when you twitch this bait down, when it floats back to the top, it comes up tail up with that head down. For some ungodly reason, I don't know why, but like fish, and they respond to that, like they eat the shit out the bait. Sorry.
No, you're good.
They will T-bone a 110. I've had more T-bones. I just shared a picture, I think, on Instagram or something like that. But more often than not, a 110 is going to be down the throat of a big trout versus like a shadow wrap. I have no idea why. It's got, the only thing I can attribute it to is that ascent profile in the way that it's tail deep. When they get after it head first or whatever it is, however they're eating that bait, since it's already maybe down, when they're opening that mouth and just feeling that rush of water, it's down to hatch, man.
When would you say the majority of the bites come when fishing a jerkbait overall? I know it can be different per jerkbait, but like if you had to kind of give one kind of key time.
Yeah, certainly on a pause. Yeah, rare. It happens. Where I'm twitching, I'm like, oh, there he is.
Surprising.
Yeah, right. Which is good. That's again another reason why I do fish like a lighter drag, is because when I'm actually twitching a bait, again, I'm kind of, twitching it pretty aggressively. And so if I'm twitching it and a fish is on, one, I'm have enough to drive the hooks, but I'm also not deliberately trying to set the hook. So the fish still has enough give. So even if I do hook that fish accidentally, I still have a chance to land that fish. But typically it is on the pause, even if it's only like a 1/1000 pause. Typically when you just sit that bait for a second, more often than not, it's a hard thump, boom, almost like a Corky thump. But very, very, and honestly, lately it's been kind of weird where a lot of the hits that I've had on a jerkbait, and I haven't caught any giants lately, but the ones I've been catching have been pretty solid. They've been really like it's almost like a tick.
Yeah.
You know, it's not very like the quintessential like jerkbait bite, rip the rod out of your hands. And a lot of the bigger fish that I've actually caught, like the 10-pounder I caught last year, actually last December, I didn't, you know, it was the craziest bite. When she ate it, it really wasn't like this boom. You know, it was more like this.
That was a jerkbait fish too?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. It's this one right here. She's retired, man.
You got to retire after a 10-pounder. I mean, I wouldn't know, but I've heard.
Yeah, I got all, you know, my 30 inchers, the ones I caught 30s are all right there.
That's awesome.
But this is it, man. This is the bait. And so actually it had, when she ate, just kind of sucked it in, felt the small kind of give, if you will, set the hook, and the fish immediately came up to the surface. And my only guess is that she did have it like in the roof of her mouth or something like that. And when I set the hook, she immediately came up and started shaking away from me. So, you know, picture
like a tarpon or a sailfish or something.
10-pound fish, man, just shaking away from you. So I'm just thinking about my lead line, just rubbing on those top fangs and that kind of tooth plate right there on the top of the mouth. Oh crap, this isn't good. And so she just took a long strip of drag and then eventually kind of came to the left. And then when she did, she started shaking back at me. So I'm trying to keep tension as much as I can and make sure that, you know, even though she's shaking, that bait's still kind of in her mouth and just trying to keep as much, man. It was the most intense fight.
That's awesome.
Finally, when I got her, I changed all my hooks on my jerkbaits, which is really another pretty sound segue there. But this was a treble hook. I don't know if you can see that, but it only has 2 now. And these 2 hooks right here, these back 2 hooks, were in the roof of the mouth.
That was it.
That was it. Dude, oh my God. So actually, when I was at the Biloxi Boat Show, I thought somebody stole that off because I have like a display of lures, just because we talk to people when they come by the booth. We talk about different techniques and stuff, and I had that one. I like telling that story. It's fun. But I thought somebody like accidentally took it. You know, I'm like, where's my jerkbait? You know, so anyway, I love it, man.
That's sweet.
But that's her. That's her.
Let's do a little quick.
Right,
so sorry, what were you saying?
Yeah, I want to touch on that real quick. So hooks on the shadow wraps, on the shadow wrap products, basically all Rapala products, change your hooks to owner ST36. On the shadow wrap itself, use the number 6s. On the shadow wrap shads, use the number 4s.
Okay, sweet.
So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, that's good to know. As far as when you're fishing jerkbaits, I mean, I know this could go pretty deep, but is there one specific kind of rod setup that you like for fishing jerkbaits? Okay.
Yep.
Share that with us real quick.
Yeah, that's a good question, Jud. And so I use a 7-foot Waterloo salinity rod. It's right here. It's this green one. It's the closest I could find to the rods that I had. They were actually made by Academy. They were H2O Express inshore series. They were 7-foot. They were a medium. And the action was a fast action tip, but the blank itself was rated for 6 to 12 pound. That's important to know because the rod itself just has enough give. So one, I can not only cast the bait, because some of these baits are pretty small, you know, like the Ama Flit's not a huge bait. So you want to have some give in the rod itself to make the cast. But then aside from that, the 6 to 12 pound, so it's, don't hit the fan, Chris. Don't hit the fan. But so
but make good TV.
6 to 12, 7 foot. Typically, always have a 3,000. Suffix 832, 20 pound. And then this is obviously not a jerk bait because I'm going down to Mansfield, but that is typically what I use. So a 7 foot rated 6 to 12, medium action. Medium power, fast action.
Sweet. Would you? This is something that I share with people a lot when they ask me about rods. Is any of my rods I'm fishing with a treble hook, especially a jerk bait, I want that give in the tip because they're going to pull those treble hooks out of their mouth 90% of the time if you're fishing a heavier tipped rod. So I That's just always something I like to share because I didn't know that for the longest time. I'd be throwing a topwater plug with a heavier rod when I was a kid and get blown up and pull like 6 or 7 fish off on a topwater plug with a heavier tipped rod. So it's definitely good to have. Well, sweet. Do you have any other hard baits that you want to go over before we switch over to the soft world? And here's another question for you. It might be a good transition. Corky, soft bait or hard bait?
Do I consider it?
Yeah,
I consider it
a soft bait.
I consider its own bait.
Its own bait.
Yeah, honestly, man, because there's nothing like it.
Yeah.
I've had a chance to actually sit down with the man, Paul Brown himself, and listen to his story, one during the podcast and then afterwards how he created the bait and how that's a Texas-born bait.
Yeah.
The reason it's not mass-produced and sold everywhere and that there is such an affinity for Texas anglers with the Corky is, and he said it himself, it was a bait designed and made by Texas anglers. So I wouldn't classify it as a hard or a soft, man. It's kind of its own deal. Yeah. It fishes like its own deal. I don't consider it either or, so it's just a Corky.
It's crazy that there is a bait that is in between the two, because if you think about it, it's like it's always a soft bait or a hard bait, and you pick that bait up and the action and everything about it is so different. Here's another question I had about that bait before we fully switch over. Do you know anyone that's taken that bait in freshwater to bass fish and those different Corky bait? I feel like, man, you get that in the right hands of the right bass pro, it could be a killer bait.
Well, so admittedly, Kyle Perry, he's a great Air Force friend of mine, and admittedly, man, he's the best fisherman I know, hands down. And I mean, from literally, he can go and catch, like in the Guadalupe here in San Antonio, he can go and pick up like an ultralight jig or ultralight rod and go catch a rainbow trout in the Guadalupe, and then he'll go he's lived everywhere. He'll go and drop shot in the California Delta. He'll go punch mats in the Potomac because he's lived all these different places.
Yeah.
But he also, he developed this crazy way of catching sheep's head in Mississippi, where it was actually like pure combat fishing. He would basically use like a modified-ish cane pole, and he would get really deep. And he's like a defensive. He actually played defensive back in college. He's a beast. And so like he really enjoyed that, but he figured out a way to get in these really tight structures with this, this rod. But dude,
just to get it way back in there with the cane pole. That's awesome.
Dude, he'll rip them, and then he's like just pulling them out, man. And he has the strength to do it. My wimpy butt wouldn't be able to do that. But dude, this guy catches them. And so he just moved away. He was stationed at Travis Air Force Base, and he was fishing the California Delta. Now, sadly, he was deployed for like almost a year and a half because COVID kept him over there. Now he's back, and now they've PCS now to Wright-Patterson, which is in Ohio. And so he'll figure out a way to catch walleye and smallmouth in the Great Lakes or something like that, right? That's just how good of a fisherman this guy is. But he actually he had every intent of throwing like Mirrorlures or 17s and the Paul Brown products actually in the California Delta with the same process that I have, which is, dude, these fish have never seen this stuff before. Right. And so I'm fishing the California Delta where they're throwing, 10-inch rainbow trout, Huddlestons, why wouldn't a Corky work?
Definitely. Definitely. It's cool to think about, 90% of the saltwater baits have come from freshwater ideas, and it'd be cool to send one back the other way.
Send it there. Yeah. Well, dude, admittedly though, like the swim bait game and the small swim bait game, is kind of picking up and obviously taking shape in the freshwater market. That's a bait that, from an H&H Kako I was throwing when I was like 8 years old. Right. Now you're starting to see them on the back of A-rigs or, there's a gazillion different manufacturers now that make small swim bait tails, that they put them on a jig head and crank them. Well, we were doing that forever. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever thrown an Alabama rig for trout?
I have not.
That's something I've wanted to try. I think it could be pretty deadly.
Where I would throw that though is like, if I was moved back to Mississippi, I would throw that in like Pascagoula, and I've fished these different areas. So they're a little bit deeper water complex. Like I can even go over like the west side of the state, which is like towards like Bayou Caddy, or over towards like the Pass Christian area where they have like these long windy bayous and they're fairly deep. And so I could totally see like casting an A-rig like up current or up into the tide or up, you know what I'm saying, and then
Yeah.
crank it back to the tide in like these 8 to 10 foot bayous. I mean, it only makes
Yeah,
sense. I
for
think it
sure.
would.
For
Yeah,
sure.
here in Texas, oh man, good luck with that. So,
Well, let's move over into the soft plastics, and I know that I don't know if I know there are topwater soft plastics, but I don't know if that's something that you were had to talk about. But let's kind of start wherever makes
no,
sense, because we
yeah,
started from top to bottom with the hard baits. But
yeah. So it's really about a confidence at this point. And there again, I don't know how much time we have. I know we've been talking for a while,
oh,
and
you're
people.
good, man. As long as you're good, we can keep rolling through this.
Okay, yeah, I'm cool.
Sweet.
I admittedly, man, growing up, I used to again throw the H&H Cockahose. Obviously, where I'm from, the Matrix Shed is king over there in the southeast part of Louisiana. Obviously, super versatile bait. And when I moved to Florida or to Texas, then Florida and back to Texas, I've really just again, man, I can really care less about catching a lot of fish. Honestly, if I go out there and blank, but learn something about maybe an area that I feel will hold the big fish, then that's when I'll go ahead and go, okay. But I'm typically throwing these bigger soft plastics. So I like 6 inches, certainly 5 inches or more. But really my biggest and my most confident soft plastic bait is really the Gambler Flap and Shad. So again, a bass bait. So Gambler makes a bunch of different products for the freshwater market. Gambler Flap and Shads are ultimate for me, at least from a soft plastic perspective. If I'm going to make the transition from hard baits to soft plastics, typically it's going to be a Gambler Flap and Shad, 6-inch Gambler Flap and Shad to start. And then I'll go to a K-Wiggler ball tail shad.
Okay.
So, and then from there, those are both kind of the bigger profiles. And then I'll go ultimately to like a down south lure. And then there's so many brands in between. You can go to like a Mirrorlure, a slick lure or a little slick. You can see that it's a much smaller profile, and then ultimately down to a Little John. Honestly, the more I've kind of gotten away from fishing soft plastics, I really don't throw a lot of soft plastics anymore. And if I do, they are of really the larger variety.
Yeah.
But the baits that I choose on a smaller end of the spectrum typically are darter style baits. So I call them darter style baits, which are basically like a Little John.
No paddle on the tail.
Yep. Yeah. So if I were to choose that, I'm going to go, and I'm looking for a big bite, wintertime, spring, fall. I'm probably going to go with the Gambler Flap and Shad. Now, I typically rig those a couple of different ways. So I'll first start with the first, which is I thought I had it. Nonetheless, shoot. Oh, yeah, there it is. Okay. So just an arrow style head. I don't know if you see that.
Yeah.
So like just a regular arrow style head. I like that because it matches the bait profile. And so when you're working that bait through the column, it just kind of comes through grass easy. And it just fishes well. Got a super wide gap. Those are the Mirrorlure jig heads that they actually make there. And then for lately this year, I found that the Gambler Flap and Shads and how I fished and where I fished them were dominant, man, on the Texas eye.
Yeah.
So this year, dude, and I know you've fished the Texas eye a gazillion times. You found the actual, hidden kind of talent behind the Texas eye with the click from, the diesel minnow and stuff like that. But on these bigger profile baits, and I did a segment on Speckled Truth about the Texas eye. I wrote a couple of different articles about the Texas eye and a Gambler Flap and Shad, and how you can fish that bait effectively on a swing head, for lack of better terms, because that's really what a Texas eye is, that swing head. And so now, not only can I fish a soft plastic, but I can fish a soft plastic really methodically, really effectively, and fish the entire part of the column, as opposed to with an open style jig head profile. If I'm fishing over grass or cover, I'm typically having to work that bait a little bit quicker to kind of keep it from snagging.
Right.
With a Texas eye, that's when I'm able to slow it down, dial it in even more, let that bait have contact with the bottom, and really kind of work that bait methodically. Dude, this spring, early summer, I I caught a lot of really. I actually had, I think it's 4 or 5 different citations, over 27 inches, really in like a month and a half span. Right when COVID happened, I was able to sneak away kind of midweek, and quote unquote telework for a couple
Yeah.
hours. And so, but I had them really dialed in, man, on this one flat. They were in heavy grass. Those fish were kind of buried in the grass, and I was able to work that through. So, nonetheless,
Yeah,
game with
that's
flapping
sweet.
shads, a couple of different jig head styles in different profiles.
I'm gonna have
Now,
to have to get me some of those flapping shads. I haven't even
yeah,
heard of them until you started talking about them. So
yeah. So two favorite colors. The first is just regular watermelon red,
mhm.
and then they make a plum white. Actually, I have three. So plum white, it's like a plum body with a white tail. So they call it a cool tip here. I call it plum white. Or they make another color called Kool-Aid,
Okay.
which is really like a just straight plum. I love purples and I love just avocados and greens, man. It matches every different silhouette in the water column. I can fish it pretty much anywhere, and those have been really good. Um, the other one that I've really had a lot of and started gaining a lot of confidence in is, actually, again, another freshwater bait, shocker, but it's not intended at all, believe it or not, to be fished on a jig head. And this is actually the castaway. I'm sorry, Castaic, jerky J is what it's called. Kind of a funky name, but really what this is, it's actually a soft plastic designed to fish. You know what a scrounger head
I
is?
don't.
So a scrounger head is almost like it's a heavy jig head with like a plastic shield around it. And so when you're swimming that bait, it's almost like a chatterbait.
Oh yeah, I have.
And
It's a bass kind of technique.
yep.
Yep.
And so when these different style baits, super narrow tail, big bait profile and presence, and the idea is when that bait's kind of coming through, it just is giving a ton of action on the backside of it. Well, I'm like, well, a scrounger head's just really too heavy of a jig head for saltwater. So let me thread it on some lighter jig heads. And so I'll really throw these on like a little 1/32 ounce jig head.
Yeah.
So it's given a lot of really big bait profile presence. I could care less about the jig head. That's really just the transport and getting the bait down.
Right.
The idea is I just want that big bait profile. And so I love how thick and how wide
Yeah, that's a good looking bait.
that bait profile is. And it also kind of, as you're twitching that bait, since it is a scrounger head and kind of a little bit softer on a soft plastic material, it does have a lot of action, but it gives you a lot of that different glide kind of coming through. It's not straight down like a traditional jig head. It has a little bit more of a glide to it.
Sweet.
So yeah, and in K wigglers are kind of a Texas kind of staple, if you will. Just a straight bait profile, really different bait profile, simple. And you can fish that on anything from an eighth. It's probably the most versatile of all of them, where you can fish it on an eighth, you fish it on a quarter, you can fish it weightless.
Yeah.
Honestly. So,
Well, sweet.
but those are different styles. Now the last thing, and um, the last soft plastic I throw, and I almost only throw it in the spring, summertime, super high pressure conditions, somewhat clear conditions, or when the bite's really tough. And I
I already
almost
know where you're
forgot.
going.
Yeah, because of but dude, is a Ned rig, dude. So the Ned rig is a beast, and so typically, you have, just a straight finesse TRD. The deal is kind of one of my favorite colors. That Hot Snakes is another one. Gobi Bryant is probably my
Gobi
favorite
Bryant, I
name.
haven't seen that one.
Yeah, but dude, I was able to do, an article with Daniel from Z-Man, and people have heard CA talk about it, but one of the 30-inch fish that I have caught was actually on a Ned rig, and it's funny because, again, Kyle Perry, my good bud, his parents live in Brunswick, Georgia, and so they fish a lot of the coastal creeks there and stuff like that. And he ended up, this is like 2000 and, geez, man, 2015, 2014, 2015, I think. And he's like, dude, I just mashed like these trout on a Ned rig. And I'm like, what's a Ned rig? And he started talking to me about it. And so I started exploring a little bit more. Well, I moved to the Florida coast, and that's when I started throwing a Ned rig a lot, because those fish are super pressured. water's super clear. They're so line shy. So I was able to really go down, in leader diameter, et cetera, and really just kind of power finesse these fish. And I'd always talked about like it's such a dumb bait, man. It's just like a little stick, call it a stick on the hook, but it gets bit, man. And I think there's a myriad of different reasons I think why they get bit, but I think that little bitty bait profile, it's able to kind of invade these big fish's like personal space. And so when it gets in that personal space, these big fish they'll get rid of it. And I call it sitting on a bait. And what happens is when they hit it, it kind of feels weird. It almost feels like you snagged, you'll set the hook and they'll eat. But I've caught some really big fish, to include that 30-incher on a Ned rig. Now, I started exploring different trailers for a Ned rig. So really the base of a Ned rig is just the finesse shroom's head. This is actually Z-Man's like Ned Lock's head. I really like that one. Or I like the owner blockhead. I typically like a 1/10 ounce or a 1/16 ounce jig head. The lighter the better, as tide and as conditions dictate. But I started kind of using anything from the swimming trout tricks to the Z-Man trick shots. So the Z-Man trick shots. You can put a lot of these different finesse style baits, to include Castaic actually makes the same ones that make a jerky J. They make a 3-inch.
Oh, sweet.
So I started putting those on the back of a Ned rig. So really they're kind of limitless. Now Z-Man obviously floats and it gives a little bit better profile, but if you're looking to just change a little bit different presence and profile and presentation, the Ned rig, man, do not sleep on the Ned rig. And especially in the spring, you start to see a lot of, fish, spawning and they starting to have a lot of fingerling glass minnows in the area. A lot of things are hatching. There's a lot more smaller bait fish in the actual estuary, and so that's a great time to throw a Ned rig, man. So that'd be it, man. I think I've covered everything from top to bottom.
You have.
I got nothing else.
Man, you've crushed it. You got me fired up. I told my wife tomorrow was going to be the start of me spending way less money for this upcoming year, and this was not a great podcast to start that off. I'm like, all right, I'm going to go buy about 15 megabass jerkbaits, got a bunch of Z-Man Ned rig trailers, but we'll see. I'm going to blame it on you if I get in trouble.
That's okay.
But well, man, thank you so much for coming on, you guys. We're going to slide over onto our Patreon page and just talk about one other jerkbait that kind of really fills a niche that Chris was sharing with me. So if y'all want to continue the conversation, head on over to Patreon. But for everyone that's listening here on the podcast platform, thank y'all so much. Thank you so much, Chris, for coming on and chatting with us. And we'll see y'all in the next episode.
Cool.
Later.